Hello guys, this is what we're going to be building, a simple API using Flask with Python and using MongoDB as our database management system. So this is what we will be able to do. So we're going to be able to add users into our database. So we can do add user, we can add another user. We're going to be able, let's try to add more users. So this is currently adding it into the database. So let's check it in Mongo Atlas, which I'm going to explain how to use this as well. So no worries. So let's just, it's loading, retrieving the data. As you can see, it's adding, Mario 10, Mario 5, Mario 3. So we're also going to be able to retrieve the users from the database. So we do. And then let's transform this into JSON so you can see all of the users that we have in our database. And we're also going to be able to look for a specific user by sending in the ID of the user. So you can see we are looking for Mario right now. So this is a pretty simple API, and we're going to follow some architecture like controllers, models, services, and routes to keep things more organized. And this is it. So let's start the tutorial right now. First, create a folder. So let's create a folder like here, user DB. You can give it any name you want to. Now let's cd to the folder, which is number 2. And in here, let's create a virtual environment. To create a virtual environment, you first need to install the virtual env library. I already have it installed in my PC. So after you install the library, let's create our virtual environment. So we have to run this command. Let's just take this out, which is virtual env, and then you give the name of the folder. So now it's creating the folder. So it's already created. If we do ls, we can see venv. Now we need to activate the virtual environment. So let's do it. So we do venv, let's get inside of the folder, and then let's go to scripts and then activate. There you go. And the virtual environment is activated. So in here, let's create the source folder. So crc, and then let's cd into the folder. There you go. CRC, there you go. And now let's open this on Visual Studio, call that. So there you go, we have Visual Studio up here. First, now let's start to create the structure of our project. So we're gonna need a controllers folder, and I will explain a services folder, a folder for the routes, another folder for the models, and another folder for the app itself. So first of all, inside the app, let's create a file, an init file. So let's do it, init.py. So inside of this folder, we're going to do the initial database configuration. First, let's just start to do our installations. So we're going to need to install Flask. So it's a simple pip. Let's do it. Let me just copy it up here, which is much faster. So pip install Flask 2.2.2. So it's gonna do the installation. So this is just opened in my. So let's just wait a little bit for it to install. And then while it's installing, my internet connection is a bit slow. While it's installing Flask, we need to take care of installing Mongo, since we're gonna use MongoDB in here. So let's install Flask Mongo engine. in here. So let's do pip install Flask Mongo engine. So it's gonna install in there. Okay, we also will need environment variables to store, some sensitive information. So let's install that as well. Pip install python.env. There you go. It's already installed. Now, inside of this folder app, let's import Flask and Mongo engine. Just close this. And now I need to import the OS and the .env library we just installed. So let's first create a variable app, which is Flask. So Flask, and then we pass in the name. So I think I need this. Now let's load the environment variables using this method from the .env library. So load environment variables, we call it. And then now let's first print connecting to Mongo, like a feedback to the user. And now let's configure this app. So we do app.config, and we need to pass in the Mongo. It's called MongoDB host, which will be passed through the os.getEnv to get the environment variable. And we pass in the Mongo URI. There you go. I will explain in a bit. Let's just continue this. Now let's create a DB, so a database, which is equal to Mongo engine, and then we have to pass in the app. This is it. And then after this, we can print connected to Mongo. There you go. And first, let's create our environment variable file, which is inside of source. We can just create a .env file. This is used to store like sensitive information, because when you push this into production, you don't want to push, sensitive information. Let's say you have an API key, which you only you can have access to it. So you store this kind of information in environment variable. There are better ways, more secure ways, but this is good because this is a simple tutorial. So in here, we need to create a Mongo URI. Here, so let's do this Mongo URI. So where do we get this? So we need to go to, we're gonna use Mongo Atlas instead of creating our own, instead of installing the database and going through all of those things, we're just going to create a new one. So if you just have to Google, let's go in Mongo Atlas, and then we click in here. So they're gonna take care of everything like hosting the database and AWS and all of that. We can use a free tier for this. So I already have an account. You should sign in. So it's already going in. So this is the first thing you're gonna see when this opens. So I just wanna go to here, up here in the organization. So I already have like a YouTube tutorial organization. You can create a new organization if you want. So right in here in the organization, I can start a new project. Let me do like user management system, and then we're gonna create this, and then I click on create project. So it's gonna create the project, and then let's click on build a database. We can choose this free tier for now, which is okay. You can choose the one closest to you. So I think, let me see if I can find Europe. So Frankfurt is good for me. So now I can create the database. So let's just do this pretty quickly. So the database is created, and we should put a password. So I'm gonna put a simple password, which I'm gonna delete in a bit so it cannot be used. So I'm gonna say database management. No, I'm gonna say user management system 1, 2, 3. Pretty easy database. So let's create the database. There you go. And then we can go to. You can either choose to put this on my local environment or cloud environment. So let's create. Go to database. So this is created. You can save the password already. So this is deploying the database. It's doing all of the configuration, but we can already click on connect and then drivers. And then all you have to do is copy this URL. You have to copy, and then let's go back to Visual Studio, and then let's paste it in here. So in this, we need to change the database. I remember we did user management system, and then we did 1, 2, 3, and this is pretty much all you need for now. So okay, so this Mongo URI is going to be used in here to connect to the database, right? That's good. Okay, now let's create the file to run our Flask application. So it could be main or run.py. It depends really on you. So let's import. First of all, let's do from app, which means from this folder, import app. We can import app in here. This app that we just created in here, and then we can do app.run. Let me just copy in here. So let me do an app.run. So this is all we need. And then let's just try to run this. So Python run.py. Okay, so you can see connecting to MongoDB, connected to MongoDB. So everything seems to be fine for now. So let's continue. So let's start by creating the routes for the user. So the architecture in here, so we are separating into different folders, so to make our code more scalable. So in the future, if you want to add more endpoints, it's going to be much easier when you have everything separated. So the routes, this is where you define the routes for each entity in your system. For example, we only have the user entity, so I'm gonna come to here and say user routes user_routes.py, right? And then in here we need to import blueprint from Flask. So from Flask import this, and then let's create a user blueprint. So we say user blueprint equal to blueprint, this object in here, and then we give it this name, and that's it. Now let's create the first route for our user. So let's do blueprint.route. So the first endpoint will be to add a user, right? So I'm just gonna do /add, and then the method has to be post. So when we want to put something in the database, we use the post method. When we want to get something from the database, we use get, and then we have delete for delete, and then we also have put, and so far and so on. So we define this /add endpoint in here, and now we need to go to our controllers. Let's go to our controllers folder, and then let's create a controller for the user. You see how we're starting to separate things. So user controller. So be careful with the controllers. So the controllers are used. Don't put business logic inside of the controllers. Don't put business logic inside of the controllers. You will understand as we go. So in here, let's just create a function add user. Right. And then on this function add user, so to add a user, let's create, we're gonna have a simple database. It's just one table, just one document. I'm sorry, because this is MongoDB, that has the name of the user. So we first need to import from Flask the request, because the user, the client, is gonna send in the data so the server can process. So it's the request from the client. So we do data equal to request dot get JSON. So we are transforming the data into JSON, and then we want to extract the name. So the user is gonna send in a name. So we create a name in here, and then we do data dot get name. So we just do a name from the object. So let's first just return like this, and then now we have to attach this method in here, add user, to the routes that we defined, the user routes. First, let's export this method in here. We can easily export with an init file. So let's go to the controller. Let's create an init in here, init.py, and then in here we can just do from controllers dot user controller, which is this file in here, import add user. So this is much easier for other, for other elements in the code to import, make use of this element as well. So now let's go to routes. In here, in routes, just go to routes, and then in here we need to import our controllers folder. So all we have to do is import controllers, since they are on the same level. And now in here we have to do controllers dot add user. So we are attaching this route to this method add user in the controller, as you can see. Okay, now what else do we have to do? Now we need to play with the services. So services, they are the ones who take care of the business logic. So now let's go to services in here. Let's create a service for the user. So we say user service, say user service.py. Right? So on the user service, let me just quickly go to there. So let's create a method in here, def add user service, right? So what do we want to receive? We want to receive in a name as a parameter, the name that the client will send in. So we want to receive a name, and then let's just do return user saved, right? Okay, so we also want to export these things. So I'm just going to create another init in here, init.py, right? From the service, let me just look in here. So we have to do the same thing, from services at user services import. So in the controllers, this is where we have to call this method. So we're gonna say import services. So it's services, right? And then we're gonna return services dot add user, and we pass in this name that we are going to receive from the client. So we get the data, so the client will send in the data to slash add, and then this data will be converted into JSON, and then we're going to get the name from that data by doing data.getName, and then we pass in this to services.add user. It has to be add user services. This is what we call in here. Let me just check. Yeah, we call it add user service. So the controller will call this method of the service method, right? And then here in the service, this is where we do the business logic. This is where we're gonna save the user to the database. But first, we need to create the model to represent, our entity in the database. How will that look in the database? So it's pretty simple. So we go to models, And in models, we're gonna do user. Let's create user model dot py. And here it's gonna be just a simple class, which we're gonna call it user. We're just gonna call it user. There you go. First, we need to import our database. Where did we define our database? We define here in app, which is this DB out here. This is what we defined. So let's import that. So we do from app. We just pass it in from app. Let's import this, and then in here we have to do db dot document, meaning this class is going to represent a document in our Mongo database. Now let's create a variable to store the ID. So Mongo actually takes care of the ID. If you don't put this field in here, Mongo will automatically take care of this. But the issue is that it returns an object ID which is more complex to handle. So this is a much simple way that I'm gonna show you right here. So we need to define the type. So it's a string field. This is all from the Mongo engine library. So we also have to import the Mongo engine. So from Mongo engine, so we say from Mongo engine, let's import the string field. There you go. And let's also import this library UUID, which is for generating IDs in Python. So we need to say that this is a primary key, the ID. So we just pass in primary key, and then we do a simple lambda operation in here, and then we just gonna pass in UUID.UUID4, and then let's create another field which is name. So it's not a primary key. So, and then we're gonna say required is equal to true, because we cannot have the user without the name, right? So this looks okay. So we have this. Now let's go back to our services. Let's go back to the services, and then in here in the services, this is where we're gonna start to do the logic. So we're gonna receive a name from our client. So let's create the user. First, we need to also export these models in here. Init.py from the models. It's pretty simple. Let's just make it simple and just call it user. Yeah, to make things a little bit more simple for us. There you go. So we are exporting this. Let's go to services, and then right here in services, we're gonna import. Let's import models. Import models, and then we can do models.user, which is the name of our class, and then we have to pass in this name, right? So keep in mind that the Mongo engine will do all of the hard work for us. Just by doing db.document, it's already doing a lot. So it's mapping this class into our document in MongoDB. So all we have to do now is basically just do user.save, because MongoDB takes care of the rest. So if you do user.save, it's gonna save the user into our database. Now, how can we run this? First of all, let's go to run.py. In run.py, we need to import the routes. So just before we run, we need to do app.register blueprint, and then we want to register those routes, the route that we created, which is the user route, which is this user blueprint. So routes.user blueprint, and then URL prefix. So what does this mean? So you can see that in here we just put /add. So URL prefix, it is the first slash that we're gonna have in our in the URL. So we're gonna have something like /user and then /add, you know. So something like this. And if we add, for example, another /get, so it's gonna be like /user and then it's gonna be /get. Pretty simple, right? One more thing, let's not forget to export these routes, otherwise we're gonna have problems. .py. So it's init.py. Let me just following. Okay. So we're gonna do from routes.user routes import user blueprint. Okay, let's just verify all of this. Seems correct. The controllers are fine. And then let me check the models as well. Models. There you go. And then let me check the routes. So it seems fine. And then let me check the services. There you go. And then now let's try to run this to see if we're gonna have any major issues in here. So let's just try to run this. It's connected to, so it's connecting to Mongo, which is a good thing. So let's go back to Mongo Atlas in here. So this is already it's already loaded. So you have to click on Browse Collections. So click on Browse Collections, and then in here add my own data. So let's create a database now. So let's call it User Management System, and let's put a collection that is user. So it has to be the same as we have it in our document. Otherwise, it would just create a new one. So this is really unnecessary because it will automatically create, but this is a good practice because now let's just copy. So let's go to our URI, and then we can, in here, in Mongo URI, just after .NET / we can actually specify which database we want to work with. If we don't specify, it's just going to create a database with the name test. So if we want to be more specific, so let's just see the name, which is User Management System. Right in here, let's just put it in here. So this is good. And now let's restart this. And then we will try to add something here. So Python.run. Okay, connecting. So it's connected to Mongo. So we are gonna use a software called Postman, which is for testing APIs. I already created something in here. So you can just come to here, workspace, and then you can create a new workspace. And then in here, you can create a collection. You can just create and then add the name of the collection. So I already created collection users with some of these methods in here. So if you want to create a new endpoint, you just click in here and then click on add request. So it's going to add request and something like that. Okay, we already have this, so I'm going to use this add user, which you can name it from up here. So our application is running on, let me check a little bit, it's running on localhost 5000. So we have to specify the port in here, localhost 5000, and then remember /user/add, and then remember that we are expecting a name. So we are expecting a name. Let me just go to the controllers to show you how it is. So we are expecting the name, a name from the client request, right? So we just create in here an object, and then we do name, and then let's just pass in a name. Let's Mario. Let's do Mario, and then let's send in the request. There you go. So it's returning user saved. Let's create another one, which is Mario 2. and then it's creating. Let's check our database right now. So let's just quickly reload this to see how it's working. So it's gonna take just a few. There you go. So you can see that we have our data inside of here, right? Mario 2. Now let's create endpoints to retrieve this type of data. So let's start by the routes again. So let's go to routes, and then in here let's add another blueprint dot route, and then we're gonna do like /get, and then since we are getting something, retrieving something from the database, the method has to be a get method. And then let's say controllers.get users. So this method is not created yet, and we're gonna create right now in the controller, and we are gonna attach to this method. So let's go to user controller. Let me just check in here, user controller. So we're gonna create a function called get users, right? And then what we're gonna do is we're not gonna take care of this in here. We're gonna take care of the logic and the services. So we're gonna say services.get users service, which is not created yet. So this controller is gonna call the service method. So let's just import it in here as well, so we don't have any problems. So let's just do this, copy, and then put it in here. So import, there you go. Now let's go to our services and create this method. So user service, right? So we have user service out there. And then let's just do it def get users, get users service, right? So get user service. So what we want to do is we're gonna say we want to get all the users in our database. So we use models dot user, which is the name of our entity, which is the name of our class, and then we say dot objects. So this is retrieving all of the objects in the database. Now we have a list of users. Let's use some Python syntax. So we're gonna say user dot to Mongo, which is a method from the Mongo engine library, and let's transform this to dictionary. That to dictionary, and then for user in users. You could also do this with a simple for loop, just looping through the users and then transforming each user into a dictionary and then put it inside of the list. So this is a cleaner way to do it in Python. So now we're gonna return this. We wanna return it as a JSON. So let's import JSON, and then we wanna say return. So this service method is gonna return JSON dot dumps. You pass in user list, and then you pass in this as well, default. There you go. So we also need to import this from Bison. There you go. So we have the service ready. Let's try and test it. So run. So no problems in here. So I already created a method, yet. If you want to change the type, you need to set it in here, which if it's a post or if it's a get. There is a bug in here, it's saying get, but for example, this one, for some of these, it's post, yeah, but no problem. So get, so we gotta go to slash, you know what, let's first change this, the route, let's go to routes, and then in here, let's change this to all, because we're gonna get all the users. You can even be more specific and write like get all users or something like that. It really depends on you. So we gotta go to localhost 5000/user/o, And then let's send in the request. So it's saying that URL was not found. Okay, let's try to debug this. So it's /o. Oh, I think I might have to stop this first. Let's try it like this now. The server encountered an internal. Okay, user services has no. Okay, I know what happened. It's because we didn't import. We didn't export this method. So we also need to export this method. So okay, let's export. Wait, doing this wrongly. Sorry. There you go. So this should be fine now. Okay, we're running. And then let's go to Postman and then let's send in the request. Okay, this is still not working for some reason. Missing one positioning argument. So let's go to our service and then let's check. Something in here is missing. Return JSON.dumps. Return JSON.dumps. The name in here is dumps and not dump. So it's really easy to make mistakes in here, but yeah. Okay, so let's see if this is working now. So there you go. We have all the users in our database. Let's just transform this into JSON. You can see Mario, you can see Mario 2. And then if I add a new user, Mario 3, and then save, and then let's try to get that user. And then you can see if I transform this to JSON, we have all of the users in our database. So let's say if we're trying to look for a specific user, right? So let's go to routes again, and then let's go to routes, user routes, and then in here let's add another blueprint, another route for the user. And then let's say dot route. Let's just call this /get. The method, it has to be get, and then let's call it get user by ID from the controllers. So let's create this method right now in the controllers. So let's go to the controllers and then let's do a def get user by ID. So in here, the user needs to send, the client needs to send in the ID of the user. So he can, when it comes to get requests, we can get it from the params of the URL. For example, in here, I could put like ID and then put something in here. So you can see in here, we can send in like this in get request. For post requests, we need to send in from the body, like we did it in here, like body, row, JSON. Okay, understood. So now, to get the information from the URL, we can use the request again. So with the request from the user dot arguments dot get, and then let's do user ID. So we're expecting a user ID, and then we're gonna return this. We're gonna let the service take care of this. Services dot let me call you. So this should be user ID, yeah. And then this is gonna call services of user get user ID service. Let me just take this out. User ID service, and then we're gonna pass in this user ID. Okay, let me just check it in the control, in the routes. How did I put it? So we need to remove this. There you go, simple. Now let's go to our services right now, user service. Let's go to our service. So inside of our service, we are going to create this method, which is get user by ID, and then we have to call it service. There you go. So it's pretty simple as well. So all we have to do is let's get the user. So user equal to models dot user dot objects, and then we want to get it by ID. Let's just look at how it is in our database. So it's an underscore in here and an ID. So we have to pass in here ID, and then let's just convert it to string, and then we pass in this user ID, and then that first. So just give me the first one. So it's only going to be one in here because the ID should be unique. But maybe, for example, if you were looking for the name, you could have two people with the same name, and then maybe you just want the first one that you find. So this is really unnecessary in here, but let's just put it in there. So let's return it as a JSON dot dumps again, and then we're gonna do user dot to Mongo, because we want to transform this into a dictionary. We really want to transform it into a JSON. Yeah, there you go. And then I think this is it. So let's not forget to export this service as well. And then we do import. Let's just check our controllers as well. User controller, and then let's see if no, we did not. Okay. Let's get this, import. There you go. So let's try to run this. Right, let's try to run this. Okay, so first let's get the users in our database. Here you go. We have these users, JSON, and then let me copy this ID in here, and then I already created one. So here you click on params, it's a GET request. You write user ID, and then you pass in the value, and then let's see. So there is a mistake in there. So let's go to our services, user service, JSON.dumps user dot to Mongo to dictionary. So what is it saying? Okay, let's just put a check in here to see. So user.objects, object ID, string, that first. Seems fine to me. Let's just put a check if user, and then else JSON dumps none. Okay. Let's run again. Let's run this again to see what this is gonna do now. Okay, so it's returning null because it's not finding it. Okay, let's just check our controllers for a second. Let's use a controller in here. Okay, let me see, user controller. So we saying user ID request.rx.get user. Oh, there you go. So it's user ID. It's presenting. So let's try again. So it's user ID. Okay, this is running, and then let's test. So this should be. There you go. Now we can find this user. So this is everything. So we wanted to keep things simple. If you guys would like to see more complex stuff with relationships, maybe deleting a user or putting this in a Docker container and running it, so you just leave it in the comments. And this is pretty much it. Thank you guys.